So last night I went to a meet and greet fundraiser for a candidate that is going to be seeking the Democratic nomination for governor of the state of Florida. And I'm watching this presentation, and he made some statements, and there were some questions and answers and so on. And the fellow that was running is David Jolly, who was a Republican. He just became a Democrat, like a blink of an eye ago. But he had pretty much severed ties with the Republican Party a long time ago. And you may know him, he's on MSNBC all the time. So my takeaway from it was he answered the questions correctly. But there was no fire there. It's kind of like he pre-planned the questions and answers. And sorry, there's a lot of bright light there in your eyes. Yes, that's my halo. Well, what do you expect? I'm not going to wait for me to die to become a saint. I get a halo now. Bet you wish you had one. That squeaking is Francois over here with his new squeaky toy, and I can't get it away from him without risking loss of an arm and a leg. It's the price you pay when you have when a dog owns you. Francois, could you knock that off for just a second? I'm trying to talk with the folks. No, not your folks. He's a MAGA guy, remember? No, my folks. Yes, they're used to a lot of noise. But I got to thinking about these two political parties that we have, which are like monsters. They keep rising from the dead, and you can't stop them. And I was listening to Speaker Johnson, that idiot, on the TV the other day. He reminded me a lot of this Francois squeaky toy, which is not fair to Francois squeaky toy. So Speaker Johnson, the man, I wonder what sport he played in college. Anyway, so the man, Speaker Johnson, is there, and he says, they talk about this big, beautiful bill is going to put us into debt. They're not taking into account the dynamics of this bill. And when you factor in the dynamics of this bill, it's going to more than pay for itself. Now, I'm an old, spit behind the radiators kind of lawyer. And when I hear dynamics, you know what I hear? It's a quiz to yourself. When you hear a Republican talking about dynamics from a tax cut bill, what's the other word for that? Okay, one of you got that. Nobody else got it. The rest of you go home. Oh, you are home. Well, that's a metaphoric statement, and I don't want to get into metaphorices or Mephistopheles either, speaking of Donald Trump. So this thing that they call the dynamic, that's Reaganomics. Do you remember Reaganomics and that Arthur Lafleur, who had the Lafleur curve? Yeah, that's right, the laugh out loud Lafleur curve. It says, look at this is the curve. And when you lower taxes, you lose income from the taxes, but that money then is in the hands of the wealthy people who will use that to invest in growth industries, and that will produce more jobs, and there'll be more people paying taxes on the income they make from all of these new businesses or business expansions, and that will far more than offset the national debt. I mean, the annual deficit. It won't be a deficit anymore. They'll be running a surplus because of the dynamics. That was Ronald Reagan and Arthur Lafleur. Do you remember what happened as a result of the Lafleur curve? Let's just see if you're, still remembering what happened in days gone by. Days of yore, as we call that. Yes, that's what we call it, Francois, so shut up. So the Lafleur curve says we're gonna slash taxes for the wealthy, but the net result is they're gonna have this dynamic economy, aka Speaker Johnson's dynamic economy, and we will have a surplus. The national debt under Ronald Reagan and Arthur laugh out loud Lafleur tripled, went up by 3 times what it was when Reagan took over. That's how well the trickle-down Ronald Reagan economics function. Now you would think that everybody now knowing that fact, and it wasn't kept from the public, I know it, would say, wait a minute, what are you talking about the dynamic? That's Reaganomics, that didn't work then. Why would he think it's going to work now? And we don't want it. Raise those taxes like Bill Clinton did. Get them back to Bill Clinton level. Bill Clinton was paying down the debt. We had a deficit, and when Bill Clinton left office, of about, what was it, $900 billion, something like that, well under $1 trillion, and he had been paying it down for the 2 years before his term terminated. That was Bill Clinton, because he raised taxes not on everybody, just on a select few, and not by much to do them any real harm. Some for corporations and some extremely wealthy people who got a slight uptick in their tax rates, but that extra money that came in more than paid for the expense of running the government and left us with a surplus those years, which was then used to pay down the debt. So Bill Clinton had to come in and correct the horrible damage that was done by Ronald Reagan. And I hear Republicans talk about Ronald Reagan was a great president. Oh, yeah, just like Ronald Reagan, they keep invoking him like he was Jack Kennedy. And I don't hear anybody in the media, the supposed liberal media, I don't hear any Democratic stalwarts coming back and saying, Ronald Reagan, don't talk to me about what a great president Ronald Reagan was. You know what Ed says about him? Ed says he was a disaster. And what Ed says is right because Ed is Ed. I heard that. I'm sensitive. Look at him back here. He's walking around, thinks he's out of camera range. He's doing down there. Francois! That's disgusting. I'm sorry you had to see that. Anyway, you didn't have to see it, but I'm sorry you saw it. So anyway, so here we have it. This is Reaganomics all over again. And nobody's saying it. You get all these people, all these economists, they talk about this, that, and the other, and basically what they're saying is the deficit is going to explode. That's what the Congressional Budget Committee, whatever it is that does that analysis, a nonpartisan group, predicted a $2.5 trillion increase in national debt, which will put us in the point we'll be close to only being able to pay interest on the national debt, which means no money for Social Security, no money for defense, basically the end of this country. And it'd be impossible to raise money because who's going to buy bonds from a country that can't pay its debts? So that could actually, we could be looking right now at the beginning of the end of this country. I won't be around to see it, but I'll be around to see it going there, over that cliff. And people say, oh, Democrats are not patriotic. Republicans, we're patriotic. Well, my dad was a full colonel and he was a war hero. I grew up in the military. I'm as patriotic as anybody can be out there. And if you're patriotic, you care what's going to happen to the country and the folks in it. And when you see that car heading for the cliff, it doesn't make me feel any better to think, well, I won't be in that car by the time it goes over the cliff. No, but other people will. And it's not a good thing. And it's ridiculous because it's totally unnecessary. But that's what this new bill is going to do. This is the dynamic bill is going to add, the best estimates are around $2.5 trillion to the debt. $2.5 trillion to the debt we already have that everybody admits it's unsustainable. And yet they support this big, beautiful bill anyway. You Republicans out there have to ask yourself, what in the world am I thinking? I support a party which supports a bill that's going to add $2.5 trillion to the national debt from a party that talks all the time about how fiscally responsible it is. Oh, we're going to cut all this spending. That's the problem. No, the problem is in slashing taxes for the wealthiest people. You don't do that. You don't have a problem like you have. That doesn't mean you can't cut some spending, that there's maybe some wealth fraud and abuse. But you know what I hear all the time? I hear people say that. And I said, well, where's the waste, fraud, and abuse? And this person said, are you saying that you don't think there's any waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government? And my response was, there may be, probably is. Anything that large is going to have some issues. But you can't just say it. If you're going to say that it's happening, you have to prove. You have to show me this money is wasted. Here's fraud. Here's people taking money and not showing up for work. Here's abuse, whatever that is. Here's people, going in and getting their hands on money to which they're not entitled. I'm sure some of that happens. I'm sure that the medical profession is rampant with that. People, doctors way overcharging Medicare so they can get money. And it's not. I don't say it's common, but it happens. So yeah, there's going to be some examples, but don't make the general statement and then challenge me to prove it's not true. There's this little thing in philosophy called burden of proof. You say something, you have the burden of proof to showing me some evidence before I'm going to accept what you say. So Republicans and those of you who are inclined to listen to them, when you hear somebody talk about all the waste and fraud and abuse in the government, you say, okay, show me the money. Huh? I think I'm going to make a movie out of that. Show me the money. Show me the waste. Show me the fraud. Show me the abuse. Do the friggin' math. Don't just come in here and say, well, this department makes, they get all this money coming in for the Center for Disease Control, so we should get rid of that. Why? Because it's not making a profit? That's not the function of government. Sometimes the function of government is to finance research which gets rid of terrible diseases. Sometimes we use the government to do fundamental technology like developing a computer. The first computer in this country was built at government expense. And it covered an entire football field because in those days they didn't have microchips, so we used to use those tubes like we used to use in the radios when I was a kid. That's right, I'm old. And the number of tubes that it had to put into this thing to make it work. And incidentally, that's the same basic circuitry that was put in the first computer, the Cray computer, as it exists in all the computers today. The same basic structure. It's ones and O's, folks. It's simple math. And that hasn't changed. But that was financed by the government. Almost every major breakthrough we've had with automobiles and with airplanes has come from the government, particularly in World War II. Look at the tremendous strides that were made in avionics in World War II. Unbelievable. I remember when I first saw it, my first time I saw a jet plane. It was flying overhead in Lafayette, Indiana, and everybody ran outside to look. Look, there's a jet plane. There's a jet plane. Now they go outside and say, oh, look, there's a jet plane going down. Okay, that's a really bad joke. But I mean, times have changed, right? Since I was a kid. Hello, yeah. But the point is that the fundamentals have not changed. The fundamental principles have not changed. When you're going out there and slashing taxes, and then you're claiming everything should just be done away with because of the waste, fraud, and abuse. Don't slash the taxes. Raise the taxes, just like Bill Clinton. Go right back to Bill Clinton's level. You don't have to guess about this. It's been done. Just go back and follow his model. In the meantime, get somebody in there, not the Dodge people, but get somebody in there who's going to take a while, and go to these programs under a microscope. And if there's money that can be saved, itemize it, and tell us about it, and put it into Congress. Do it the right way. Do it the right way, but the cutting of taxes is an easy one to figure. You don't have to do an independent analysis to understand that. All you have to do is look at the income returns and what happens to the income when you slash taxes versus when you raise taxes slightly. Not for everybody, just for the top few, and that has been done before in recent history. It was done under Bill Clinton. So let's stop with the slogans and the platitudes. That's on the Republican side. Now, what about the Democrat? What's their one? So just to put this on the sheet there, what I'm talking about here is Reaganomics coming back as the Republicans saying, oh, we'll cut the taxes and we're going to get this dynamic economy. Dynamic economy equals Reaganomics, and Reaganomics was a total failure. So that's the Republican. We can't stop them from doing it. They just can't help themselves. Well, what about the Democrats? I'm a Democrat. Been a Democrat my whole life. My father was a huge fan of Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman. I met Harry Truman when I was a little kid. I was only like 23 years old, and no, I wasn't 23 years old. Stop believing what I tell you. So we had just come back from Paris. I was 48, so I was like 3 and a half. And Truman was getting ready to run he was running for president, and my dad took me backstage to meet him. Truman had handpicked my dad to handle status of forces prosecutions in Europe after the war. So it was kind of a reunion for them, and it was like, yeah, cool for me. So I still remember that. But I've been following politics since that time. Been a Democrat, been a proud Democrat. But the Democrats also do the same damn thing. You can't kill these monsters they raise. And what's the biggest monster that the Democrats have? AFDCA. C, DC, what? AFDC. Aid to Families of Dependent Children. AFDC. I remember when Bill Clinton was president, and the folks out there, so many of the rural people, the hardworking, the lower income level people that we now have lost again, they were furious with the Democrats. Why? Because of that AFDC program. Because they would see, and particularly where they associated with young black women in the ghettos having babies so they can get money from the government to pay for babies that they can't support, but yet they keep having them. And some of them were just treating it like a business. The more babies I can have, the more money I can get from the government. I can pay my rent, I can pay all my fixed expenses, which don't change with the number of kids I have. And so this was a racket. And it was really hurting the Democratic Party. So Al Fromm comes along and he creates this group, this organization, and to start pulling the Democratic Party back toward the middle. They elected Bill Clinton. I think he was elected as one of the presidents. And Bill Clinton was like, that's the group that pushed Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton came in and what did he say? He said, I'm going to get rid of welfare. By that he meant AFDC, and he did. Got rid of it. And then he also said, we're going to do something about crime, and he did. And he got a bunch of money, for money to go to aid with municipalities and state law enforcement to help them crack down on crime. Bill Clinton was very conservative in these areas, as incidentally am I. But Bill Clinton was highly successful in that. And remember what I said is the view of so many was that this AFDC and being soft on crime, they associated that with black people. So Bill Clinton's policies should have been antagonistic toward the African American community at the time. And what do they call Bill Clinton? The first black president. Why? Because he listened. And because he realized that the vast majority of black people were not running around wanting to live on welfare, nor did they support crime. They were just like everybody else. And he recognized that, and he wasn't condescending and said, well, they need special treatment and privileges and this, that, and the other. He said, no, we're going to play by these rules. And remember his slogan was, I support those people who play by the rules. Okay? They play by the rules. They work hard, they play hard, and they play by the rules. So he was tough, but he was popular with the very groups that today's Democrats seem to be terrified of alienating. So what do they do now? Here comes the monster. It's coming back, folks. That's right. That's right. What is it? Well, it's the child tax credit. That's just AFDC by another name. It's not a tax credit. That's a lie. So they've got the Democrats lying about that. It's a tax credit means you owe so much in income tax, but I'm going to cut down your income tax by a certain amount of money because I'm going to give you credit for these things. And you already have credits for children. This is different. This is if you're below a certain level of income and you have children, we will give you money. It's not a tax credit. It's AFDC with a different name. You think people don't see through that? They see through it. Democrats, stop it. Bury that monster. Don't bring the same monster back that almost destroyed this party under a different name. Go back to Clintonomics. That's where we need to go as a country. Let's go back to the way Bill Clinton did things. That doesn't mean we go to the Republican side, because I just spelled out with you, they're a disaster. The problem is these things that I'm talking about, they're not just irritations, like so many of the social issues or the cultural issues. Those are irritations, right? Affirmative action. That's an irritation. It's also it's grossly unfair, but doesn't go to the fundamentals of the survival of this country. But these other things do, because at the end of the line, politics and government is about finances. It's about basic economics. It's about, you can borrow a little bit of money and live on borrowed money for a while, but you've got to be super careful when you do that, and don't put yourself in the position like both parties have put us in right now, but particularly the Republicans. So it's just, I was watching this discussion, and David was great. He said the right things, but he said them almost like a script. And somebody in the audience said, we got a bigger problem. He said, I'm looking around here, I notice there's nobody in this room, and there were like 500 people there, who belong to Generation X or Z or Y, whatever the hell those are. No young people were in that room. I was the youngest person there, and I'm 80. I was by far the youngest person in that room, except for one person who was jumping up and down and pointing at herself, and this is a young lady who says she was going to run for Congress. And she was pointing at herself and saying, I am. So we had one person who was of General X or Y or Z, whatever the hell the latest generation is. I've lost track. And she was pointing at herself. Everybody was ignoring her. Everybody was just kind of sitting there in sort of stunned silence, looking around, saying, yeah, we got a room full of people who are like a week away from the grave. Not dying, I mean visiting somebody they know in the grave, but a week away nonetheless. And it's like, what's going on with the Democratic Party? Yeah, Well, I tell you what's going on right away. We've got to stop this business of pandering to the special interests as it comes to things like welfare and crime and demonstrations for people who get killed by the cops because they were involved in resisting arrest with violence, which almost all of them were. And I remember I listened on the radio to the trial of the last fellow, whose name I can't remember now, thank God. He was killed in Minnesota, and the demonstrators treated like he was some sort of saint, and that he was murdered by this cop who suffocated him. And I listened to the trial, and I listened to all the expert testimony, and that isn't what happened, folks. The guy died because he had a heart attack. He didn't asphyxiate. He died of a heart attack. And he was full of drugs at the time, and he had a history of a bad heart, and he was still taking, I think it was cocaine, by the snortful. So it's too bad that this happened. It's a bad thing. It's a shame, and it was very sympathetic that he was saying, "I can't breathe," while somebody's back, knee was on his back. But the knee on the back by the cop, who was a tiny little guy, he was like 5'3" or something, and this guy was on the ground, was 6'6" or something like that, massive guy, and he was just trying to control him. In the meantime, they had called for ambulances. The help was on the way. What was he supposed to do? Get up and let this guy, who was a giant, just run loose? So it's sad. I'm not saying that, and I'm not saying the cops behaved appropriately. You could second guess it and say, they should have done this, they should have done that, but they sure as hell didn't deliberately set out to kill this guy. It wasn't any kind of premeditated murder, and it wasn't, as far as I know, there was zero history of racism. But the Republicans jumped all over that. Look at these demonstrators; they're out demonstrating, and Mr. What's his name walks across the street to that Lafayette Park over there with an upside down Bible. Didn't even know it was upside down, and sits there and wants to call in the National Guard. He just, this guy takes advantage of any situation that he can for publicity. So, but the Republicans love that. Oh, look at the demonstrators in the streets, and all and it inevitably happens. You have large peaceful demonstrations. Within that group of peaceful demonstrators, you get a bunch of people in there who say, "This is an opportunity for us to go, break into stores and rob people. So let's do it." And what do the Republicans do? They say, "Look at another mob, another Democratic-led mob." And the Democratic politicians almost never run out there and say, "This is awful. These people shouldn't be demonstrating. They're giving cover to a bunch of people who want to commit crimes." You never hear that. Democrats, stop it already. Don't let the Republicans, just like the Republicans, take over the flag. Stop letting Republicans take over the flag. Stop letting Republicans take over the law and order issues. Let's get those back to the Democratic Party, but let's focus on doing something about getting this debt under control. In the meantime, make sure that we have enough socially protected programs. All of them were created by the Democrats, every single one of them. The Republicans fought Social Security tooth and nail. They were still fighting it when I was born. They fought Medicare. They all voted against it when Jack Kennedy introduced it. And I remember when Kennedy introduced that Medicare idea, and it wasn't signed by him. Another one of my pet peeves: quit giving Lyndon Johnson credit for Medicare or civil rights. Those were things that Kennedy did. Johnson just happened to be there because Kennedy was assassinated, but those were bills introduced by John Kennedy. And they passed, and they've been highly successful. So Medicare is something that people need. Republicans almost to a person voted against that. I remember Barry Goldwater coming out and just calling it socialism and communism. Anytime the government's going to do something to help people with the Republicans, it's always socialism and communism. Socialism and communism. I grew up with that nonsense. I worked at Army McCarthy hearings. It's just disgusting. Anyway, be that as it may, I don't want to digress. I tend to do that. You know that. That's not my fault. I'm still thinking a lot, even in my advanced years. So, bottom line on this thing is, Democrats, follow the Bill Clinton playbook. If Al Fromm is still alive, go to him and say, "Al, help us out of this mess. We're losing because we have a terrible trademark right now." That's one of my specialties, is intellectual property law, which includes trademark. The trademark of the Democratic Party right now, with so many of these people that used to be with us, the blue-collar workers in Michigan, the blue-collar workers in Pennsylvania, the blue-collar workers in Ohio, all that Midwestern area, it was solid Republican when I was a kid. It became solid Democratic, and now it's gone back to being Republican again. And we have ourselves to blame. Not me. I didn't do this. I'm blameless. That's right. Blameless. But my party is not. So we've got to get back to talking tough on these issues. And we also have to recognize that there's racism in the Republican Party. Now, Actually, I was going to save this for a whole different thing, and I think I will. I think I'm going to do my next one about the racism, which is not the kind of racism that you think. You know, you take a Republican and say, here's a black man who is a MAGA supporter. Hey, I'll give him a big hug and a kiss right there on the spot. So it's not about the color of people's skin. It's about what they perceive to be the black issues, and the black issues are, as we've just been discussing, welfare, crime, demonstrations, support, antagonism toward the cops. These are the things that the Republicans associate with black people. Gee, you know who else did that? And I wonder if he could get away with this today. It's Ronald Reagan. Remember Ronald Reagan again? The great president we had, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan used to talk about the welfare Cadillac. Gee, who do you think what image comes to mind when you think of somebody driving a welfare Cadillac? Or the welfare mom. The welfare queens, he used to call them, the welfare queens. Gee, what race do you think that pops in? What image pops in your head when you hear welfare queens, welfare Cadillac, welfare, welfare, welfare? That's why you had the Reagan Democrats, union workers, who voted for Ronald Reagan because of these issues, which is how we would call diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, which, again, that's another name for the affirmative action monster that the Democrats keep bringing back to life. These parties have got to get off of their rigid positions on these issues and start talking to the American people, the broad swath of us, who are the broad swath of us. Hey, excuse me, I believe I have two swaths. Never mind. So, the broad swath of us who are in the middle. This is not a slight right to center country, that's a lie. We're slightly to the left of center, but the key here is slightly. Let's get back to where we were, and let's don't take any crap from the Republicans. And when they talk about this best beautiful bill, let's call it what it is. It's Reaganomics, and it's going to do the same thing Reaganomics did. But by now, we're so far along on the debt thing that this could kill us. Let's talk about that in those terms. Let's stop advocating for DEI. Let's stop making excuses for rioters. Let's out-Republican the Republicans on those cultural issues. That will pay off. And I'm so tired of hearing Democrats say, Malcolm, what should we do? Well, it's not our message. We're doing the right thing, but we just don't message it right. No, the message is the thing. What you say is something. This is why Jack Kennedy was such a wonderful president. It wasn't just what he said, it's how he said it. He was an inspirational person. He was a leader. What you say and how you say it matters. Folks, politicians, listen to me. All right, enough of that. Nobody's listening to me anyway. I'm just working myself up, and I'm going to die an early... No, I can't die an early death. I'm already past that point. Ha! All right, on that cheery note, I'm going to get out of here before I say something that I'm going to regret. Shut up, Francois. Bye.